There's a magazine up here on this table, and when we do have a break, we hope that you will come and take one of these stories that Alex has been so beautifully sharing. Come from the stories that he has assembled, the history of not just our faith, but why we do what we do in healthcare. So please, we hope that you will take one of these magazines and enjoy. My name is Joyce Newmyer, and I come from Adventist Health, where Alex and I are doing our part to hold down the left coast, and happy to be here with all of you. I am privileged to be an FOT, a friend of Ted. I suspect that many of you are FOTs as well. Dr. Ted Hamilton is the Chief Mission Integration Officer for Advent Health. He's been a Chief Medical Officer, a Chief Quality Officer, and he's held medical leadership positions in hospitals, health systems, managed care organizations. He's an MD, an MBA, but he's also been called a physician pastor, a medical theologian, and a healer of the soul. And I believe all of that. Several years ago, a mutual friend of Ted's and mine was diagnosed with a horrible cancer, one that is most always fatal. We were told by people in her circle that if our faith was strong enough and our prayers fervent enough, her cancer would be gone. That didn't set well with me, because I don't think that's how it works. But I needed to talk that through, and so I did what any reasonable person would do. I called Ted. I said, my friend, we need to talk about this. And through that conversation, do you remember this, Ted?
No.
I had a feeling that it wouldn't have been as big a deal in your life as it was to mine, because you were imparting the wisdom. I was the recipient. And I came away from that conversation with 100% conviction that healing is always available, even when a cure is not. And I live in that belief every day, working in what we call Adventist Health or Adventist Health Care or Advent Health or Kettering or Loma Linda. We all live in that space. Dr. Hamilton's most recent book, conveniently right here in my hand, The Healer, reinforces this assurance that healing is always available. And if you haven't picked up a copy, I encourage you to do so. It is beautiful. Please give a warm welcome to our dear friend, Dr. Ted Hamilton.
Okay, it's going to take us about a minute to change over the computer. While we're doing that, stand up, stretch, walk all the way around the table, back to your seat, stretch again, maybe it'll be time to sit down.
Way around the table.
More friends.
Oh, okay. I didn't see you guys over here. I'm trying to see because I haven't got my glasses.
Yeah, you have to be close.
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks for giving me the courtesy of my work.
Yeah.
I spoke to.
Oh, I didn't see.
I was looking for you. I didn't see you.
I'm here, so anytime you want.
All right.
Yeah, I'd
Let's
love
catch up on the
to.
break.
I'd love to. It's good to see you. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Good to see you too.
Yeah, it's very good.
She
Do you
came
know
for
each other?
one of
Yes.
our she came for one of our mental health and faith community conferences. That's how we met 3-4 years ago. I don't
She is
remember.
amazing.
Yeah, I know. And we all know that.
That's true.
How's good?
Good, yeah. He dropped me off, but it wasn't a good time. He says hi.
We met before.
All right. Well, you say hi back. We'll catch up.
Yes, I sat across the table. I have a little.
Morning, Dr. Hamilton. How are you? Oh, we'll have to work on that for next year.
Yeah. Well, I don't have to have it. I can get along with it. Got it. I'm good. Okay, take your seats, please. Let's bring it back together. Many of you were here yesterday when Gina Moore and Grace Wee did their breakout session, and I was in the audience too. I remember one thing from that rather distinctly. Gina said that she had learned from her mentor that, 3 words, all beginning with W, that were really helpful to her in dealing with difficult situations, sensitive issues. Those 3 words, all beginning with I wish, I worry, and I wonder. Well, I wrote those down. And at this moment in time, I wish I had followed anybody other than Alex Bryan. I worry that I'm going to stumble over my own carefully chosen words and fall flat on my face. And I wonder why so many of you came back for this presentation. But I do appreciate it. Meet Charlie Gard. Charlie Gard was born August 4, 2016 in London, England, to a young couple, Christopher Gard and Constance Yates. Charlie's first weeks of life at home with his parents were normal and uneventful, but by 2 months of age, Charlie was losing weight and having difficulty lifting his head. Charlie was admitted to the Children's Hospital in London and was soon placed on a breathing machine. He underwent a muscle biopsy and genomic sequencing, which resulted in the diagnosis of an extremely rare condition, encephalomyopathic mitochondrial DNA depletion syndrome, or MDDS. I don't know what it means either. I do know that encephalo means the brain, and myo means muscle, and pathic means something wrong with both of them. MDDS comes in several forms, but all typically cause progressive loss of energy. That is, energy from a cellular perspective that affects the body. The muscles fail to work properly because of lack of energy, and the brain fails to grow, and seizures developed. At the time of Charlie's diagnosis, there were only 15 cases of MDDS reported in the world literature. All 15 of these had experienced early onset of muscle weakness, and all died within a few months. By the time Charlie was diagnosed with MDDS, he was paralyzed and unable to breathe on his own. He was deaf, and his vital organs, heart, liver, kidneys, were affected. Based on his condition and a very poor prognosis, his doctors began a discussion with his parents about continuation or discontinuation of life support. The Hospital Ethics Committee met and supported the clinical recommendation to not perform a tracheostomy. There was no proven treatment and no known cure for Charlie's condition. But Charlie's mother, Connie Yates, was not prepared to give up. She went online and learned of an experimental treatment in the United States that seemed to help some children with a less severe form of MDDS. She contacted the neurologist in New York and asked him if his treatment might be of benefit to Charlie. The doctor was noncommittal because this therapy had never been tried either in animals or humans with Charlie's form of the disease. In mid-December, Charlie began to experience seizures. The New York doctor agreed to a trial of the experimental, untested, unlicensed medication. However, it would have to be approved in the United Kingdom. Charlie's EEG continued to show worsening of the seizure activity. His doctors and the Hospital Ethics Committee continued to disagree with Charlie's parents over continuation of life support. Within a short period of time, thanks to social media, Charlie's case came to the attention of the British public, who raised over £1 million British pounds to send Charlie to the United States. But by now, Charlie's condition had deteriorated to the point where it was deemed neither safe nor advisable to transfer him across the ocean. The British courts became involved, ultimately ruling on behalf of the hospital and its ethics committee. Pope Francis and the President of the United States issued statements supporting Charlie's parents. But the European Court of Human Rights upheld the decision of the British court system. On July 27, 2017, with parental consent, Charlie was transferred to hospice. Mechanical ventilation was withdrawn, and on July 28, at the age of 11 months, 24 days, Charlie Gard breathed his last. His parents continued to believe that had their son received treatment sooner, he could have lived a normal life. The Washington Post opined that this case became the embodiment of a passionate debate over the right of Charlie to live or die, his parents' right to choose for their child, and whether his doctors had an obligation to intervene in his case. Legal academics refer to this as a stigmata case, part of the meditation of a culture upon itself. Part of the meditation of a culture upon itself. So this is the title of this conference. When Jerry told me that was going to be the title and suggested that I might consider talking about it, I thought, what's he thinking? What is meant by this curious title, Jerry, The Ethics of Hope? What does ethics have to do with hope anyway? Is a mother's desperate hope something to be pitied or admired or simply tolerated? Is hope a moral issue to be debated by clinicians and committees and courts? Is there any such thing as false hope, or is that just an oxymoron, a contradiction in terms? How about no hope? True or false? Here's the first question for you. True or false? As long as there's breath, there's hope. I'm not going to make you stand like Alex did. Can the cost of hope be measured in dollars and cents or British pounds and pence? And what is ethics? Is it right versus wrong? Is it legal versus illegal? Is it science versus dogma? And who decides? Who decides? The patient? The parents? The doctor? The lawyer? The president? The pope? What indeed does ethics have to do with hope? Let's take it apart a little bit. Webster and Roget agree that the concept of ethics has to do with moral philosophy and principles, values, conscience, and conduct. Hope, on the other hand, is defined by the dictionary and described by the thesaurus with words like desire, belief, confidence, imagination, anticipation, expectation, and action. In Charlie Gard's case, ethics and hope were on a collision course from the get-go. The healthcare system, represented by clinicians, committees, and courts, depended heavily on austere ethical considerations. But Charlie's mom relied upon and acted upon hope. A mother's instinctive hope. Is it an overreach to suggest that ethics is head stuff and hope is something of the heart? Who's right? Who's wrong? Who decides? Or more broadly, what's right and what's wrong? How are these conflicting and often contested questions sorted? By whom, on what basis, and by what authority? Moral and ethical issues are perceived differently and processed differently, depending upon educational and professional background, sources of authority, and methods of interpretation. Let's look at a few examples. If one's discipline is religion, I will let you raise your hands for this. How many of you are chaplains and pastors? A bunch of you. If one's discipline is religion, your context for sorting out these questions is likely theological, largely. I know by personal experience that that's true of what we call the Biblical Research Institute. They go by their very name. They go directly to theology. The standard they use is revelation, generally recorded in a book, and tradition, religious tradition of the body. The question is, whose book? Is it the Bible, as we believe? Is it the Quran? Is it the Book of Mormon? Is it the Catholic ERDs? Whose book do I base my decisions on? And once I've read the book, it does require interpretation. Always. There's interpretation that contributes to that. How many lawyers in the room? I know there was one here yesterday. Jim may not have made it back. He knew better. Here you are. So, the law obviously looks at the legality of it, and there are codes, long, aged codes, and many times, going back to Hammurabi, hundreds of years. And there are precedents, and there are ascending levels of courts that often disagree with each other as it wends its way up to the Supreme Court. Whose precedent prevails? Decisions have to be made. Here's where I'm closer to home, and many of you are in healthcare as well. We tend to fall back on probabilities. What does the latest study show? What is the anticipated survival rate following this procedure for that particular condition? But that's problematic too, because which study do you draw from? Do you draw from the five that sort of agree with each other, or the one that stands out like a sore thumb? Which study? If you're in academia, and I know that some of you are, and here we are in an academic institution, philosophy is often where you fall back. I loved Patrick Smith's representation yesterday of philosophy as having two horns and a lot of bull in between. You recall that? So philosophers fall back on Plato and Socrates and the philosophers of the Enlightenment and the more modern philosophers. Who do you trust? How do you decide? In the community, it may not be cleaner, but it is somewhat clearer. We vote. As Texas and Florida and some other states show, laws can be changed by a plurality, by a community who decides by consensus or majority we're going a different direction. Whose vote counts? And finally, ethicians. And there are a number of highly ethical people in the room, and then there's me and some of the rest of us, who look at this from a moral perspective based on values. But the values of which culture? Whose culture? In this country, we have many cultures who weigh in. How do we decide? And then we go to the patient who's dealing with the reality of a condition that's problematic and often ominous, and there is a certain inevitability about it. What takes priority? Who takes priority in this regard? And often that falls to the healthcare system to weigh in a significant way and take responsibility, whether we wish it or not, because this is the totality of the deal. This is the finality. Who, why, when, how, and where does the buck stop? Who are the players at the ethics committee? Well, you just saw them on that previous slide. They are the physicians, pastors, priests, poets, prelates, philosophers, and prognosticators who undertake a process of investigation, interpretation, consultation, deliberation, and decision-making, a decision that ultimately impacts directly on patients, or as in Charlie Gard's case, parents. Let's set the ethical deliberation aside for a moment, and let's talk about hope. What then can be said about hope? Actually, a lot, as it turns out. H. Jackson Brown said, never deprive someone of hope. It may be all they have. Atheist Robert Ingersoll cynically observes, hope is the only universal liar who never loses his reputation for truth-telling, for veracity. Brent Muschinga says, hope makes ill people feel better. It improves their mood, strengthens their motivation to undergo treatment, and may even increase the chance that treatments are successful. The theoretic physicist and atheist Stephen Hawking, who had ALS for most of his adult life, said, however bad life may seem, there's always something you can do and succeed at. Where there's life, there's hope. Patty Davis, the daughter of Ronald Reagan, an actress and author, as far as false hope, she said, there's no such thing. There's only hope or absence of hope, nothing else. There are few injustices deeper than the denial of an opportunity to strive or even to hope. Stephen Jay Gould. Sir Francis Bacon, I like, even if I don't like what he said, I like the way he said it. Hope is a good breakfast, but it's a bad supper. Alexander Pope, hope springs eternal in the human breast. Benjamin Disraeli, I'm prepared for the worst, but hope for the best. Which brings us to the Bob. Now, I know that many of you in this room are too young by far to recognize this gentleman. This is the Bob Hope. Bob Hope, a much-loved American comedian who had a special concern and warm place in his heart for the American military. And year after year made trips all around the world, entertaining American troops wherever they were, on station or in combat. Bob Hope said this, I've seen what a laugh can do. It can transform almost unbearable tears into something bearable, even hopeful. Hope. False hope. Eternal hope. Hanging on by the fingernails. Hope. Good hope. Bad hope. No hope. Bob Hope. Hope anyway. What about healing hope? Thomas Aquinas described the extremes of hope as two opposed vices. Despair, that's on the no hope sides of things, and presumption on the false hope side of things. Rene Descartes agrees, when hope is so strong that it altogether drives out fear, its nature changes, and it becomes complacency or confidence or presumption. Likewise, when fear is so extreme that it leaves no room for hope at all, it's transformed into despair. So somewhere between despair and presumption must be a healthy hope. Maybe it looks something like this, that despair and presumption with hope there in the middle. Another writer says, there's another complication in this little equation here, and that is, as a threat to hope, worldliness is an issue. That stumped me as I was going through researching this. Worldliness? Really?
But then I thought about it, and I was reminded of a song that Peggy Lee made popular in How many of you were here in 1969? You don't have to raise your hands. I remember the song well. The lyrics of the song Peggy sings tell about a little girl whose dad takes her to the circus. And they have a wonderful time together. But as they're walking home, she says, "Is that all there is?" Somewhat later, a few years later in life, she recalls standing on the sidewalk in front of their home as she and her dad watched it burn to the ground. There was excitement, and there was fear, and there was amazement, and there was sadness. And at the end of it all, she looked back and said, "Is that all there is?" She grew into young adulthood and fell in love, and the love fell apart. And she said, "Is that all there is? If that's all there is, then let's keep dancing. Let's break out the booze and have a ball." I think that's worldliness versus hope. If that's all there is, then let's keep dancing. Break out the booze and have a ball. Contemporary thinkers have not ignored this apparent conflict between ethics and hope in the clinical arena, defining hope as a future-oriented expectation for the good. Anna Weston places value on the patient-practitioner relation as a mode of hope. She suggests that bioethics be viewed through a hermeneutic or lens of hope. You're all familiar with the four cardinal classical ethical principles of autonomy, non-malfeasance, beneficence, and justice. The bioethical application of those four principles might look something like, for autonomy, respect for choice. Non-malfeasance, back to Hippocrates, do no harm. Beneficence has to do something with balancing the risk, and justice with responsibility. What does it look like when we apply the lens of hope? Maybe just a nuanced difference, but autonomy then becomes self-efficacy, the ability to make one's decisions, one's choices, to contribute to the conversation about one's health and life, to minimize harm. And those were carefully chosen words, because the truth is that surgery harms, and radiation harms, and chemotherapy harms to heal. How do we minimize the harm in trying to achieve the healing? Balanced risk. I view that as, through the lens of hope, as communicating truth with grace. Patients have a right to know the truth about their condition, its prognosis, and its possibilities. But that knowledge must be delivered with grace. And realistic goals. The goal may not be for another 10 years of life. It may be for, what's the most important thing I can do for you today? How can we make today a good day? But questions remain. Who decides? What are the probabilities? Have we truly been transparent in this discussion, this conversation? And then a much bigger issue that goes to patients like little Charlie Gard. How long can we justify the use of resources to take care of Charlie? Especially if there aren't enough beds or rooms or respirators or whatever. We've had to deal with that in COVID. for the last couple of years. Bert Muschinga says, when is hope false? Is it bad to have false hope? Is it better to have no hope than false hope? Hope can only be called false, he says, when it's based on ignorance. Martier compares realistic hope and responsible hope. Remember those two words, realistic and responsible. They're different. Realistic hope, he says, has three components. There are goals, there are pathways to meet those goals, and agency for self-efficacy to navigate those paths. He emphasizes that responsible hope seeks goals that are realistic possibilities. Gail Geller has a particular interest in children and little ones, and she says that sometimes hope becomes a cudgel that parents are bludgeoning themselves and others with, unable or unwilling to give up hope because of the possibility, however remote, of a miracle drug or treatment, and in the midst of real pain and suffering, parents often persist despite reality and reason. Geller proposes a broader concept of hope, a concept more tangible, more practical, more present, one that values hope for a good day, a good quality of life, good relationships, or even a good death, alongside the hope for a cure. How does this work out in real life? Can it be intentionally created or developed? Maybe it looks something like this. Hope with the despair of no hope at one end and the false hope of presumption at the other. And somewhere in the midst of that, an effort to be realistic, which, according to Muschinga, is based on knowledge. Here's what we know. We know the cell type of your disease. We know the stage of your disease. We have a pretty good idea of what that prognosis is. So that's the knowledge. But knowledge doesn't get you all the way home. It requires understanding as well. And that understanding is to live with the patient as they get to the point where they understand. To live with. The crux of the matter is this. If reality depends on shared knowledge, and if reason depends upon mutual understanding, what does it mean for a caregiver to responsibly and kindly navigate the precarious channel bounded by shoals of reality and reason? How is that accomplished? Gail Geller, again, writing in a surgical journal, says surgeons need to allow space for patients to express emotions before effectively communicating a shared decision-making plan in order to honor their hopes and goals. Surgeons do this by slowing down, avoiding more data provision or educating them medically, allowing silence, not interrupting their emotional flow, and showing empathy. I'd suggest that while this is very good advice for surgeons, it's not bad advice for every one of us in the room. Mm-hmm. Sometimes space is the best place to be, and sometimes silence is the most appropriate thing that can be said. Allow space. Slow down. Breathe. Allow silence. Show empathy. Charlie McKeesey gets it. You may have heard of Charlie. He published the New York Times best-selling book, The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. And in this little dialogue, the boy says, "What do we do when our hearts hurt?" And the horse answers, "We wrap them with friendship, shared tears, and time, till they wake, hopeful and happy again." So here we are, ethicists, academicians, clinicians, chaplains, pastors, and assorted healthcare professionals. We are, for the most part, affiliated with faith-based, mission-focused Christian healthcare institutions. How does the concept of ethics of hope apply to us, to our institutions, to our care of patients? What resonates? What rankles? How does Christian belief and practice influence our understanding and practice of the ethics of hope? More to the point, how does our Christianity affect our views on quality of life, the experience of disease and dying, and expectations regarding an afterlife and eternity? In short, is there a distinctive ethos of hope founded upon and driven by Christian thought and practice? The word hope appears in Scripture some 150 times, depending upon the translation referenced, about equally divided between the Old and New Testaments. One of the most eloquent and impassioned treatments of hope is found in the book of Job, who expresses contrasting emotions of deep despair and profound hope. My days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle, and they come to an end without hope. Job 7:6. 6 chapters further, he says, though he slay me, I'll hope in him. Hope appears about 50 times in the writings of Paul in the New Testament. Of the patriarch Abraham, Paul writes in Romans 4:18, in hope against hope he believed. In Romans 8:24 he reasons, hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes for what he already sees? And finally in 1 Corinthians 13, but now faith, hope, and love remain. It's clear from these brief sample passages from Scripture that the concept of hope has been discussed, debated, and desired for thousands of years of human history. Hope has been and remains prominent in Christian belief and practice today. The German theologian Jürgen Moltmann, in his 2012 book entitled Ethics of Hope, Jerry, makes the following statements. Christian hope is founded on Christ's resurrection. 50 pages later, he says, the turn to the future, resurrection into life, and the life lived in love, these things constitute the Christian ethos of hope. David Elliott is assistant professor of moral theology and ethics at the Catholic University of America, published his book, Hope and Christian Ethics, in 2017. This work, according to one reviewer, embodies the convictions that it articulates. Confidence in the face of despair, solicitude rather than presumption, and a genuine commitment to earthly identities. In addition to the two vices of presumption and despair attributed to Thomas Aquinas, Eliot is the one who added that word worldliness as a key threat to hope. And he says here, I just love this quote, the gentle despair, is that all there is? The gentle despair of worldliness may, according to Eliot, wear a trendy and smiling demeanor, yet it is a sepulcher, none the better for being whited. Another reviewer of Eliot's book, Stephen Jensen, writing in the Thomist, states, a world without hope is a world without love. I think that's where you finished up just a few minutes ago. He goes on to affirm that hope rests upon faith in the resurrection and the gift of grace, which elevates our nature to union and friendship with God. So we return to the case of Charlie Gard. Christian writer Carly Holman wrote, nothing could ultimately change the fact that Charlie was born with a terminal illness. Another Christian writer said, we cannot pretend as healthcare professionals that failing to pursue every hypothetical treatment for the would-be benefit of every potential sufferer from every conceivable illness is an intolerable evil. Strong words. Billy Hallowell, an editor, this case forces us to truly ask ourselves, do we really believe in hope? This author goes on to say, hope is a God-given gift that holds the power to sustain us. It is many times the only string holding together the torn and tattered fabric of our lives as we face unthinkable scenarios. So how does a Christian ethos of hope differ from a secular ethos of hope? The secular ethos of hope is largely limited to present hope. After all, if you don't believe that things are going to get better, it leads to no hope or despair. And to hope for something better, pie in the sky, is a false hope, a presumption. That's secular hope. A Christian ethic instead talks about, instead of present hope, hope lived daily in love. Hope lived in love. And instead of no hope or despair, it's like Abraham, as recorded by Paul, hope against hope. Hope against hope. And finally, on the other end of it, living hope and resurrection for the Christian. The differences between Christian and secular hope. Billy's story appeared in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1978. I was practicing medicine in a little town in North Carolina, and I read his story, and I tore it out of the magazine, and I've kept it for almost 50 years. Billy was a 5-year-old boy. His mother was an ICU nurse in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Billy had been diagnosed with Burkitt's lymphoma. It is a tragic disease, still is today. But then there was not much effective treatment, and Billy had had everything done that could be done, and he was not getting better. And his mother wanted to take him home from Albuquerque to Boston for one last time to see her parents, Billy's grandparents, and hopefully to get a consult at Boston Children's Hospital, then and now one of the finest children's hospitals in the country. So she got on an airplane with Billy. They flew to Boston. They spent a few days with the grandparents, and then Billy's condition kind of dropped off a cliff. He was not doing well at all. He was hospitalized. And by now his dad was in Boston too, and his parents conferred and said, you know, we don't want to take him home in a box. We want to take him home. Well, he was sick enough that he had to have medical accompaniment on getting back to Albuquerque. So a young pediatric resident, whose name just happened to be Hope, said, I'll go. She ran home. She put a sticker on the refrigerator, gone to New Mexico, back tomorrow. And they went to the hospital, helped put together the money to buy tickets for them to all get to Albuquerque. They got on the airplane. Now remember, this is 1978. They didn't have to go through security. They didn't have anybody watching them very close. He still had tubes and lines and whatever. Hope just wrapped him in a blanket and walked onto the airplane with him. It was not a nonstop flight. It was a flight that landed in Dallas, Fort Worth. And they got off the plane, and when they got off the plane, someone there noticed Billy's condition and said, he can't get on the flight from here to Albuquerque. We're not going to have a baby dying on an airplane. So they ended up in a little emergency room in Fort Worth. And Hope is stuck there in that emergency room with two very distraught parents and a very sick child. And she said, how about medevac? Would they take us? And they said, no, not in this circumstance. We take people who need care, but this child could die, and that's not our mission. So by now it's 11 o'clock at night, and Hope asked the emergency room staff, do any of you know a doctor who flies? And they said, yeah, Dr. Benson recently got his pilot's license. She called Dr. Benson at about midnight and told him the story. He said, I'll be right there. He came in. They spent the next 2 or 3 hours arranging to get the parents to Albuquerque on a commercial flight, gassing up the airplane, figuring out how to have oxygen tanks at altitude that wouldn't explode on them. And Hope says that as they walked out to get on the airplane in the early hours of the morning, that she said it looked like a Volkswagen with wings. And they climbed onto the plane. Somewhere between Fort Worth and Albuquerque, Billy roused a little bit. And he said, well, where are we? And Hope said, we're going home, Billy. He went back to sleep. They landed in Albuquerque just after dawn. They didn't want to land in Albuquerque before dawn. Those of you who have been there know that Albuquerque is flat, and then there's this big mountain that's right there. They wanted to see that mountain when the plane landed. So they got there just about sunrise, landed the plane, taxied over to where the commercial jet was, and Billy's parents climbed into an ambulance waiting for them to take them to the hospital where Billy's mom worked. Hope went with them, showered, changed into clean scrubs, and got ready to return home. 3 hours after getting to the hospital, Billy breathed his last. A month later, Hope got a letter from Billy's mom thanking her for all she had done for Billy and for them to get them home. And she included in that letter a photo. This is what a Christian ethos of hope does. We bring people home. We bring people home. Peter, in his short epistles, mentions hope 6 times. This one is 1 Peter 1:3. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy, he's given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of the dead. Hope brings us all home. Thank you.
Such vivid reasons for why we get together. Tell you what gives me hope, and that's being on the same team with Ted and Alex, Brian, and the rest of you. Yeah, it's been really good to be here this morning. Good